Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay with this? Let's see. Good evening. We'll go ahead and start. It's lifter at 5. I know everybody has other things to do this evening, or a lot of people do, so we'll get started and try to stay on track a little bit. I'm Lee Plemmel. I'm the Carson City Community Development Director. The Community Development Department has all the permitting services for the city as the permit center, which includes zoning permits, building permits, and also business licenses. So as we look, like with medical marijuana establishments, as we look to regulate this one way or another, we're going to have to put some sort of regulations into our zoning code. So that's kind of the purpose of starting up tonight. Oh, let me turn on this so we have our presentation. Sorry. So the purpose of this workshop tonight is to provide a forum. So this is at the direction of the Board of Supervisors. We're here to give some feedback that we want to take to the Board of Supervisors for possible regulations on recreational marijuana. And so one of those, we're recording this. I went back and stopped this, so made sure this started to record. So when you speak, if you're public, you'll need to come up to a microphone. If you're around the table, turn the microphone on when you speak. And the purpose of that is so that the Board of Supervisors can look at it, or anybody can go look at it, because we want you to have questions and comments tonight. We have a forum of a panel of experts in various representing various entities around the community. So as questions come up, they can answer them depending on what the question is. I have comment sheets and pens here that I will shortly, when I turn it over to her, turn it over to Dagny. I'll put them over there. So we're taking comment sheets that you can leave here or take them away. It has our address or email on the bottom to turn them in, so we can forward those to the Board of Supervisors. So how we're going to do this is, I gotta. So everybody has an agenda. We've invited certain panel members again that have either in the industry or represent community groups that have specific concerns. We also have city departments, health department, fire department. The sheriff might show up later. Probably he was invited, but so as certain concerns and questions are asked, we have a different host of panelists to help answer our questions. So before on the agenda we're going to start with a presentation from Dagny Stapleton with the Nevada Association of Counties. She's going to give us an overview on what the current state laws are related to marijuana, including laws that were passed in the recent legislative session. Then I'm going to give an overview on the current medical marijuana establishment regulations in Carson City, so how we currently regulate medical marijuana, just for some context. Then we're going to open it up to the panel to have some panel discussion and the viewpoints that the various panelists may have on it. If anybody has a presentation that they'd like to give or just make some sort of brief statement, that would be the appropriate time to do it. And then at the end, we're going to take public questions and comments. So you don't necessarily have to hold your comments till the end. Like for example, when at the end of Dagny's presentation, if anybody has questions on the state regulations, that would be the appropriate time to ask those questions, and you can raise your hand and ask questions anytime along the way. We have a manageable size group here, so I think it's okay. We don't need to be too strict, but I think we want to be respectful of everybody's time and keep it moving a little bit. So I think with that, I'd like to just briefly go around the table so everybody knows who's at the table and who's here available to answer questions. So we'll start. If you can go around, and again, just click the mic, turn the red light on like that, and turn it off when you're done. Just if you can briefly state your name and who you're representing.
Hi, good evening. My name is Dagny Stapleton. I'm the Deputy Director of the Nevada Association of Counties, NACO. We are a nonpartisan public organization that represents all 17 of the counties in the state.
So good evening, everyone. Nick Morano. I'm the city manager here in Carson. I want to thank you all for taking time to come tonight. This is going to be an important discussion, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
Sean Slayman, Fire Chief for Carson City.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lucinda Mahoney, and I am the owner of a marijuana production facility here in Carson City.
Hello, I'm Will Adler. I'm the director of the Sierra Cannabis Coalition, and I represent the 2 dispensaries in town as well as the cultivation and productions. And I'm glad to have this community discussion to sort of get out the facts and talk about, what's going on in Nevada today. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Gasca, and I'm here on behalf of Rise, a dispensary that's operating on the south side of town. My firm, Pistol and Stigma, has been working with Rise since long before they were operational on compliance-related issues, adherence to state laws and local ordinances. We've done work with the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors since the inception of the program. In fact, my firm actually was party to writing the original application that allows the entity to even exist in the state. So we're very, very familiar with the operations of Rise and all of the laws that they're required to adhere to. So we're here for that. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Sabrina Ostrander. I am here as a representative of Rise. I work there, and also I am a patient of cannabis. So I'm here to answer any questions.
My name is Diana Ortiz. I am a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. I work for a nonprofit local organization, Community Counseling Center. I am also I live in Carson City. I'm also the mother of 3 young girls, and I'm happy to be here, part of this panel.
Good evening. I'm Nikki Aker. I'm the director of Carson City Health and Human Services, a department within the city.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Bartos, and I'm the Executive Director of Partnership Carson City, a local coalition.
Hello, everybody. Linda Lang with the Nevada Statewide Coalition Partnership. The Nevada Statewide Coalition Partnership is a collaboration of all the community coalitions, such as Partnership Carson City Statewide.
I'm Shelley Aldine, very familiar with this room. I spent 10 years as a member of the Carson City Board of Supervisors, but this evening I'm here on behalf of the Capital City Circles Initiative. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that helps elevate the working poor out of poverty.
I am Richard Stokes. I'm the superintendent of schools here in Carson City.
Good evening, Adriana Freilich, Chief Deputy District Attorney for Carson City, representing the city and the Board of Supervisors.
Good evening, everybody. Jason Woodbury, Carson City District Attorney.
Okay, thanks everybody. With that, I'm going to sit still now down here and Dagny's going to stay here so the camera doesn't have to follow her. Okay. And we'll start with Dagny's presentation on the state regulations. Thanks, Dagny.
Well, good evening, everyone, again. Thank you for the invitation from Carson City, who's one of our organization's members. One of our main jobs at NACO, the Association of Counties, is to represent counties at the state level and at the state legislature. The Nevada State Legislature was in session earlier this year from February to June 6th, and in light of the state of Nevada legalizing recreational marijuana, there were numerous bills regarding marijuana and the implementation of marijuana that were heard and worked on throughout the session, and then a handful that were passed into law. So representing the interests of counties, one of the many topics that we worked on this session on behalf of our members was marijuana legislation in terms of how those laws and the implementation of those laws impact local governments. And I also served representing counties on the Governor's Task Force on the implementation of Question 2, recreational marijuana. So I'm going to provide a brief overview, as Lee said, of the laws pertaining to marijuana. And so just to start, I know everybody knows this, but despite the fact that marijuana is still a federally controlled substance, last year Nevadans voted to make our state one of the handful of states that legalized recreational marijuana. Medical marijuana was already legal in Nevada, as most of you also know, passed into law in 2000, and then a few years ago, medical marijuana businesses were made legal, and I believe there are 2 of those dispensaries at least here in Carson City. So for better or worse, depending on your opinion, question 2 made the use of recreational marijuana legal here in Nevada. So as I mentioned, marijuana then became a big topic of conversation at the legislature, and a handful of bills were passed that augmented the laws that are now on the books for question 2. So starting, though, with question 2, what does the passage of question 2 mean? So basically, it's now legal for anyone over the age of 21 to possess and consume marijuana in Nevada. According to question 2, you can possess, use, transport, and purchase up to 1 ounce per person. Additionally, you can have 6 to 12 plants in your home if you do not live within 25 miles of a dispensary, and there's some exemptions to that for medical marijuana patients. If you do have plants in your home, those must be secured in a locked area away from kids. The use of marijuana is only allowed in private settings, in homes, not on the street or in other public places. You can't drive and use marijuana in your car. You can't be under the influence of marijuana while driving. Also, according to question 2, the sale and cultivation of marijuana is legal. So question 2 allows businesses to open whose sole purpose is to sell marijuana. That is, if a local government decides to permit marijuana businesses in their jurisdiction. So each city and county in the state can make that decision for themselves whether they would like the businesses in their jurisdictions. Some additional highlights of the state law created by question 2. The state of Nevada will license all the businesses that produce, sell, or handle marijuana. The state subjects businesses to strict security requirements. All businesses have to secure every entrance and have extensive security systems in place, including cameras inside and outside of the businesses. Also, everyone who works on site at the establishments must register and be screened with the state. Each person that works on the premises must have a card issued by the state stating that they are approved to be employed at the establishments. There's also seed to sale tracking of marijuana, so every ounce of the product at every step of the way is tracked by computer so that none can come or go to or from the black market from the legal industry or stream of production of the product. The question also mandates the screening of owners of any marijuana businesses, and that includes background checks and a rigorous application process. Also, the product itself, marijuana, will be tightly regulated and tested, so every ounce is also tested at labs for quality and other characteristics, pesticides, things like that the products has to meet. They all have to be labeled. And there's also restrictions on packaging to protect children, and the potency of the product has to be stated on the packaging. Question 2 also stipulates that employers still have the right to set policies for employees restricting the use of marijuana. So if you're a business owner, you still can set policies for your employees restricting their use of marijuana. So in terms of the local government role of the regulation of marijuana, again, cities and counties can decide whether they will allow businesses that sell, grow, and process marijuana. If they do, the local jurisdiction is then responsible for regulation of the businesses as well as the state. So local government is responsible for maintaining the health, safety, and welfare of residents and communities. If a local government were to allow marijuana businesses in their community, the governing body is able to work with law enforcement, code enforcement, and the community to create ordinances that regulate the businesses, building types, security, of course the location. That's a big one that local jurisdictions are responsible for. And much of this is carried out through the local business licensing process. So in addition to state licensure and state laws, there can also be that local process created. There are some standards set by the state that a local city or county can't change. However, many of the local laws that can be enacted can be more restricted than state laws. including, of course, restricting the businesses altogether. So what we don't have control over locally, of course, is the fact that it's legal to use and possess marijuana. So if the folks in your community decide to use this, aren't buying it locally, it's still legal for them, of course, to buy from somewhere else, a neighboring jurisdiction, and bring it into the community to use. And then finally, local governments can also impose fees on the revenues of the businesses in their communities, in addition to a 3% fee that the legislature enabled local governments to charge. All the other taxes and fees that are assessed on marijuana, the sale of marijuana, and those businesses are returned to the state. So, in addition to question 2, which becomes part of the state law, some of the additional laws that were passed by the legislature dealt with a number of things, including local government authority, packaging, security. So there was a bill clarifying that local governments may create regulations on marijuana businesses that are more strict than the state over all areas except for a few key areas in which the state will set the standards. And those are packaging, dosage, seed to sale tracking, the product types that will be available for sale, most transportation, and then licensing of employees. There was also a bill specifically addressing packaging of the product. There's significant restrictions on packaging to attempt to keep the product away from kids, so especially edibles, and to ensure that the products don't look like candies or other treats. The product must be accompanied by written warnings about impairment. They have to read, please keep out of the reach of children, do not drive while using this product. The packaging also it can't be clear, it has to be opaque so that you can't see inside. If it's a cookie, you can't, the child isn't supposed to be able to see through the packaging. Also, local law enforcement was enabled through one bill to be able to remotely access video systems. So all the businesses have internal video systems and cameras, and local law enforcement, if they wanted and had the technology, could connect into those to get a real-time view of what was going on in the establishments. There was language also to clarify that marijuana businesses are the only places that you can buy marijuana from, and you have to buy the marijuana from a person. So you can't have marijuana vending machines, can't sell marijuana in grocery stores. Marijuana can only be bought from a person through these businesses. There were also limitations put on advertising to ensure that marijuana isn't marketed to children. You can't show the consumption of marijuana in an advertisement, so you can't show somebody smoking or eating an edible in an advertisement. You can't advertise anywhere where the audience is predominantly under 21. I think if the audience is larger than 30% of people under 21, you are not allowed to advertise in that venue. So you cannot advertise marijuana products at sporting events, on public transit, places like that. And then finally, there was a bill proposing to allow marijuana events in social clubs, essentially private establishments for folks 21 and over, like bars, where marijuana could be consumed. That bill was not signed into law, affirming question 2's strict stance on allowing marijuana use in public, at least for now. So what are other counties doing? So just so this group is aware of what some of the other jurisdictions across the state are doing in terms of allowing businesses, I wanted to provide a brief summary. In Southern Nevada, Clark County, which is where Las Vegas is, Clark County did pass an ordinance to allow recreational marijuana businesses. I think as did the city of Las Vegas, if not, they're preparing to. So those Southern Nevada cities are preparing and planning to, as soon as they are able, allow those businesses in their communities. I'm not sure the same is true of Henderson, but that's true for the majority of the cities down south. Up in Washoe County, Reno recently approved an ordinance to allow recreational businesses to begin selling. So as soon as the state is ready to give those licenses, in Reno and some of the Southern Nevada jurisdictions, you should be able to buy marijuana right away. We think a few of the rural counties are also looking to allow establishments. We're not sure yet. Some will allow cultivation and farming, so some will allow some of those businesses. The city of Fernley and Lyon County has said publicly that their intent also is to allow marijuana businesses there in Fernley. So in terms of the total number of marijuana dispensaries, question 2 specified how many of the dispensaries would be allowed in each jurisdiction if, again, that jurisdiction decided to allow dispensaries. So that's only for the dispensaries, not the labs and production and farming. I believe what the question said there was that the state had to make a determination in terms of supply and need, in terms of the number of those businesses. But the dispensaries, there are no more than 20 allowed in Washoe County, 4 here in Carson City, and then 2 in each of the rural counties. Counties and cities could then also, of course, limit those numbers. If they decided to allow the businesses, they could limit those numbers through their zoning regulations. Or counties, question 2 stipulates also that counties can request that the state grant additional licenses, so that if a jurisdiction did decide to have the businesses and wanted more, they could request that the state allow them to have more. Down in Clark County, it's 80 of the marijuana dispensaries or marijuana stores that they're prepared to allow. So marijuana on tribal lands, this question came up. We thought it was an important one, wanted to answer. Similar to the states, tribes may also allow the use and production and sale of marijuana if they choose. So you may see tribal governments allowing stores in their community as well as the legal use. And then Governor Sandoval did sign a bill to allow the state of Nevada to enter into agreements with tribes, and the purpose of this, our state law can't govern tribes. However, the purpose of this was to allow the governor to enter into agreements with the goal of having similar regulations, hopefully on tribal land, as the state did, to try to make sure to control and regulate the industry in a similar way on tribal lands if tribes decided to go in that direction. And then finally, the timeline. So what is the timeline for all this? Of course, the use and possession of marijuana is legal already pursuant to the passage of question 2. And medical marijuana dispensaries, of course, exist already. It is those medical marijuana dispensaries that will be granted the first recreational business licenses from the state. It was initially thought that the licenses from the state for the recreational businesses would be granted as early as July 1st, but I think there was a decision by the courts today that will impact that date, and so it doesn't look like July 1st will likely be the date that those jurisdictions and businesses that are up and ready could start operating. So it's sort of a wait and see on that. Local jurisdictions are on their own timeline, so just like Carson City is deciding how they want to move forward with the businesses in their community, every other local jurisdiction in the state can decide when, if, and how they want the businesses in their communities, but again, the consumption and possession is allowed regardless. And then early in 2018, the state expects to have permanent regulations for recreational marijuana licenses and businesses in place. So that would be not just those businesses that had been medical businesses, but any business interested in a recreational business license could then also apply to the state, and the state will be ready with that process in 2018. And then that's all I have. I'd be happy to take any questions unless Lee wants to go ahead with his presentation.
Does anybody, Shelley, maybe anybody that has questions, we'll start with Shelley.
Thank you, Dagny. So how does statute define need with respect to the number of permissible outlets for recreational marijuana?
I'm sorry, how does
commercial demand? I mean, you referenced need. I can understand need if it's being used for medicinal purposes, depending upon the number of prescriptions issued by doctors, for example, in a certain length of time. But how do you establish need when this is not something that people need unless they're using it for medical purposes? That's my question.
That's a great question, and I'll be honest, I do not know the answer to that. That is something that's up to the state through their regulatory processes. You know what, no, as far as I know, it hasn't.
No,
and
it's just based on population.
Yeah, the question, right, just based it on population in terms of the dispensaries, and then said.
So need is a misnomer, then. It has nothing to do with need in the conventional sense of the word. It's just based on population and geographical area. Nick, is that the?
I can
Yeah, go ahead. If you want.
So the question set the number of dispensaries, stores that would be allowed in each jurisdiction. The additional businesses then that feed the product into those stores, so the cultivation, farming, labs, production, how many licenses the state is going to allow of those depends on the need of those, say in Clark County, those 80 dispensaries. So depending on the amount of product, and I think I would say market demand, that someone else might have a better answer than that. And then that market demand, in terms of what that actually translates into number of licenses for, say, marijuana farms, would be up to the state regulators, and that's the Department of Taxation.
Yeah, I think Will or maybe Mr. Hartman would correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think there is a limit on, necessarily a limit on anything other than the retail establishments. The number of other types of facilities, the production, the cultivation, those are simply determined by the market.
Yeah, Will Adler, for the record, have it, I guess. The initiative and the original medical marijuana law in 2013 only limited dispensaries. They left open how many cultivation production certificates could be issued because they were thought of as the silent partners in the marijuana industry because they are not open to the public. So the public does not see the cultivation production, so they did not put a limit on the number of cultivation productions. They figured the market would limit how many are operational and viable. So that continued over into the recreational law, where we saw a simple doubling of the number of medical dispensaries for a number of recreational dispensaries. It was just simply doubled in the initiative and its language. But the need, I guess, language could be indicated as what the local government feels the need to have in their area and their community. The need could be none. The need could be as many as they have medical facilities for. I know the city of Henderson is looking at limiting it just to having medical marijuana dispensaries getting recreational certificates because they did not want to uncouple medical from recreational in the marijuana market. So I think the need is up to the local government. If it was a flat fee, I could see the need of a local government being licensed as many as you can to have the greater flat fee. Right now we have a 3% gross fee, so it's up to the local government to determine how many they wish to have right now.
And if I might add, this is Rebecca. The limited licenses for dispensary is one thing, as has just been discussed. The need of those licenses to properly serve the market is what the greater need is that the department will continue to keep in mind through the initial 18 months. And that was one of the things that hadn't quite been clarified, that the existing medical marijuana establishments get preferential treatment under question 2 to get licensed as through an application process as an establishment, as a retail establishment, and as a throughput. Right now, what the department is considering is kind of issuing one-to-one licenses. So an existing medical marijuana cultivator would be able to kind of translate and get a retail license as a retail cultivator under that preferential treatment for the first 18 months. So largely the assumption is, so long as local jurisdictions allow for medical marijuana establishments to also become retail establishments, then by and large, all of the medical marijuana establishments, regardless of whether they're cultivators, producers, labs, or dispensaries, will flip their licenses to be able to essentially operate as a dual licensee. Now, from a local jurisdiction standpoint, that's really important because a cultivator, let's say here locally, theoretically, they're able to provide their product statewide. And so if there's a local purveyor here who may be the only purveyor in the entire state that's making a certain sublingual drop, if the local jurisdiction prohibits them from turning also into a retail licensee, then the need of the dispensaries statewide arguably might not be getting met for that particular product. So it's going to be up to the department to really track what kind of products are being offered by the different licensees, where those products are being distributed, where they're being consumed. I think in the long run, what you'll really see is some really interesting longitudinal data that the department is going to be providing, since under the legislation, they're also going to be overseeing the medical program and the business side of it as well.
And I would just add one thing. I know this has been a long answer so far, but at the end of the day, it's also still up to the local jurisdiction and to the community. And, you know, we represent local governments at the legislature, and that was something that we fought for, too, to make sure that counties and cities can still say, no, we don't want this if their community doesn't want it, or yes, we do. So the state can issue as many, state can deem the need, you know, based on the industry and the need of the patients or consumers and all that. But at the end of the day, it's still going to be up to the local jurisdiction to decide what they want in their community.
And for the record, just Jim Hartman, just to clarify a couple of matters. The initiative calls out, the only thing it calls out are retail establishments in terms of number: 80 Clark, 20 Washoe, 4 Carson, 2 in the rural counties. Does also have a provision that says local governments can increase that number of retail establishments. It does not say in the initiative that they can decrease the number of establishments. However, there is a separate section dealing with zoning and land use that I think could be utilized to limit the number of retail establishments in a county.
So, no, I thank you for that, Jim. I think the only other point I want to make, I think we've kicked the can on the issue here. When Lee puts up his brief, I think you'll get a feel for how the market actually works, because we have at least one establishment that has been approved and hasn't opened because the market is not there, or at least not there presently. So.
Any other questions for Dagny?
Any questions for Dagny?
Diana Ortiz, for the record. I heard you mention that there is going to be a label with potency. My question is, as a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, been working in the field since 2004, and a couple of my clients, not a lot of my clients, share that the marijuana is so strong, and I quote, that it's up to 80% THC, and I quote, I smoke, it's so strong that I only need to take a couple of hits and I pass out, and I don't remember passing out. So my question is, in regard to potency, will there be a limit as to how strong, how much THC can go into a product, whether it's smokable, whether it's an edible, and also have been hearing about the wax where kids are dabbing and adolescents are doing it as well. So I'm curious as to, is that dabbing form of marijuana going to be allowed recreationally? There's a lot of proof through the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA, that it's very strong THC. It's really impacting kids' brains. So that's one question I have. And the second is, how are we going to, just these questions I have, enforce so people that are 21 and can buy recreational marijuana? I have clients that are teenagers, 18, transition age youth, that buy the marijuana from people that have medical marijuana cards now. So they give them money to buy the marijuana, they get the strong stuff, the good stuff, and I quote, so how are we, if we make it recreational, I think this is gonna just increase the accessibility for marijuana, increase addiction, because marijuana, cannabis is an addictive substance. It's in the DSM-5. And so those are some of my questions, wondering about how we're gonna address that as a community. Thank you.
Does anybody have a, do you? Go ahead.
I can't respond to all of that. I have become a marijuana expert only to the extent that I had to work on all these bills this last session. But I can tell you that one of the requirements in one of the bills was that each product has to specifically state what the potency is. So that is required. In terms of a limit on potency, you know what, I don't know the answer, but I can definitely get the I can look in the legislation for you, or I'm sure that there's one of the industry folks here has an answer. I do think dabbing is one of the products that is allowed. And then in terms of enforcement, that's probably a question for law enforcement. All the laws are on the books to be able to prohibit what you described from happening, but you're right, it's a question of enforcement, so probably best for law enforcement to address that one.
Will Adler. I'm not law enforcement, but I will take a stab at it. Thank you, Kenny. So right now, it is currently, as a medical marijuana patient, if I sell my product to an underage kid or just anybody who's not a marijuana patient, it's currently a Class E felony under law as is. And the same will be true for anyone who's 21 or older who purchases it and then sells it to anybody is a felony, a Class E. To resell it, you cannot resell recreational marijuana to another adult 21 or older. If you sell it to a child who's under 21, you're supplying a minor, and the first offense is a Class E, and then I think it steps up after that to a D, and then maybe even a C if you're a continual or habitual reseller of marijuana. So right now, it is not legal for a patient to do that to start, and then under recreational marijuana, it's the same policy. If you're 21 or older and purchase it, it is for your own consumption, and you do not have the ability to resell it at any time. So it is a felony still to do that. As far as enforcement goes, if we have packaging that shows up in a child's hand, or if they have the marijuana still in their room and you find the packaging, take it to a dispensary or take it somewhere in town and have it scanned. They can give you a timestamp on when it was sold. And then we have camera footage that we have to store for 60 days. And the police can audit that footage, or the DPBH, now Department of Tax, can also audit that footage and tell you who bought it when, and you can actually get an image of the person who purchased it, who then resold it illegally. So if you have the original packaging, that is also an avenue for enforcement. Is that a perfect solution? No, but today we have marijuana being sold, and I'm trying to give you the best answer I can under our legal law and what the current violations are, but maybe the sheriff could speak further.
How you doing? I don't trust him that much. Okay. When it comes, I want to address one thing first. The overuse. That's an individual. There's little that anybody up here can do to force you to take only 2 aspirin instead of 3 or 4 or 5. Okay. As for the enforcement activities here in Carson, as we talk about this locally here, we've moved much of the responsibilities for the juvenile side towards our school resource officers. That's predominantly an area that they will, around the year, be attacking, both inside the community as well as out in the hillsides. In addition to that, we are retraining our special enforcement officers and patrol officers to be able to respond to the district attorney's office's needs based on their drivings and habits that we come in contact with. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Let me chime in on this. The sheriff and I have actually talked about if Carson City goes down this road, and I don't necessarily know that the decision's been made to do that. That's part of what tonight is about. But if you go down this road, one of the consequences of it, of making recreational marijuana available, is that you tend to normalize its use. And that's a danger when you're talking about that population under 21. And the sheriff and I have talked about just how important it will be for law enforcement, if we go down this road, to take a very strong, very consistent stance on the enforcement of what the law does not allow. And Will is correct that that there are laws on the books to prevent everything that you've talked about, and those laws are not affected by this. But it's a good point to raise because it's going to be more available. And I think the strict and consistent enforcement of the laws that haven't changed is going to be a real priority for law enforcement from my perspective.
Tiffany, do you have something to add to that?
Sabrina Ostrander for the record.
Sorry, Sabrina, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I would like to personally address your question because at RISE, we definitely, that's our top important priority in dispensing is making sure we're doing exactly how we need to for the safety of everybody in the community. We are always making sure that who is purchasing it is for themselves, and I know we can't completely make sure that they're not, not following the rules, but our biggest thing is to make sure we're educating. And if we're not educating them and they are doing something that's illegal or because they don't care about their own legal rights to make sure they're doing it correctly, we want to make sure that if they're coming through our dispensary, that they are responsible 100% adults, just like everybody should be responsible for their alcohol consumption or taking care of anything else that they need to for headaches. Or our biggest thing is know what you're using, make sure that you are properly using it and not giving it to anybody that's not a patient. And we always are stressing that that is illegal to sell to anyone. So I personally would love to make sure if anyone is coming in hands of medical marijuana that's not for them, I would love to hear back from the community. And I know that all of us that work there, we want to make sure that our kids are safe. I have a mother. I'm a mother of 2 boys, and I take it very seriously.
And if I might real quick just follow up, I think that Rise would also agree that the education side of this isn't just when people come into the dispensary, although that's definitely a beneficial opportunity for people, especially new users, to come in and actually get real education. Because the problem is right now people are getting it on the streets or from a friend, and they don't know how to properly consume. And that's why we believe that the presence of brick and mortar stores in the community could actually help curb overconsumption, because new users will have a place to go for information if they're curious about it. I've personally never dabbed. I never plan on it, but for some people that is their preferred method of consumption. And so it's really about arming people with the correct education. I'll also add that in Colorado, which is the state with the largest data set for adult consumption over the last several years, the data that they've collected that I've seen is that usage rates have not gone up for kids under the age of 18. I don't know about between 18 and 21, but that usage rates have not gone up, actually. There's pretty ample evidence at this point to show that. There's one study, one extrapolated publication that has said otherwise, but if you look deep in that data and actually look at it in a wholesale form, you actually understand that the opposite of what some of the headlines have said are actually true. I'm happy to work with any, particularly drug educators. I actually think that your role in the community is so important, and if there's anything that we can do to provide information to your staff, in terms of training on what the law is, we'd be happy to. Any sort of co-education campaigns to let people know what the law is and how important it is to understand what you're consuming. This is a new trajectory. It's not like alcohol, which has been around for so long. And everybody's body is different, right? Even if I were to dab, my body's going to react differently than somebody else's body is, and most new users don't understand that. So that's also an important part of consumption, regardless of what the THC level is.
Diana, that was a good question. Thank you. And but the one part somebody asked about potency, and limits of dosage. Lucinda, do you have?
Will Adler, for the record. I'll handle that as well. Sorry. So there is no cap on the potency of a single product and what the THC quantity could be inside that product. There is a potency cap on serving sizes and what it is. So to explain that a little deeper, you can possess 1 ounce of marijuana in leaf form, which can have any potency of THC that goes up and down, but then concentrates are where you're seeing the 80%, things like that. So it's not the plant itself is 80%, it's after it's concentrated, it becomes 80% or more. And in that, if we have an edible, we will be limited to having 25 milligram serving sizes or 10 milligram, depending on what it is, for that one piece in the container. The container itself cannot hold more than 100 milligrams of THC. So if you take an 80% potency product that is, 1.2 grams of marijuana, it would make your 100% potency there in the container. So there's a formula there, but there's no limit on the number on the test result. There's a limit on how much is in each serving size. So that's, for example, there. But that is one where we see, you know, for example, an extreme variety of products. You have an edible that's 10 milligrams, but then you can have medical marijuana patients that have end-of-life treatments for cancer that use suppositories that are 700 milligrams total. And that is one where you have horrible cancer and you don't want to feel anymore, and they use those products. But that is obviously not a recreational product because very few people use a suppository recreationally, I would probably say.
Lucinda, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll be really quick. I'm Lucinda Mahoney, and we own edibles production facility here in Carson City. So I just would like to just make one quick point. I employ a full-time patient education manager, and his primary goal is to go into dispensaries such as Rise, and we set up a little booth, if you will, in the waiting room where patients sit before they go into the dispensary to purchase their products. And our primary objective is to work with them and teach them about the marijuana, teach them about our products, and more importantly, our theory is always start low and go slow. And I mean, that is really critical. And I know that the dispensaries, the bud tenders particularly, you know, continually relay that message to patients as they come in. But we're dedicated to this. And if at any time you would like to have Tim, who happens to be here right now, come and work with you at your organization and work with any of your youth, we would be more than happy to do that. I would dedicate that time.
Thank you. Before I move on to local regulations, any other questions about state regulations?
I just had one real quick one, Lee, thank you. And that is, Daniel, could you kind of go over a little bit again about the advertising? It can't really be where children can access it too easily. Would that include things like, say, for example, Carson Now, our local web-based news? A lot of youth go to that because they don't read a newspaper anymore. I have nothing to line my birdcage with.
The standard is 30%. If the audience is 30% or more of children, then they are not allowed to advertise marijuana through that channel.
So 30% under the age of 18?
21.
21, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
So, I can share I have a summary of that specific legislation, but it calls out also public transit, sporting events, and the types of advertising that you can do. So, but I'd be happy to share that with you. I've got it here. It goes into more detail.
If I could ask one more quick question, and that's regarding the money. Under Senate Bill 487, Dagny, it talks about the last part of it says recreational tax proceeds will go to the state's rainy day fund that will be used for fiscal emergencies, and then local governments will receive $5 million for program costs. So is that $5 million divided up statewide between just those counties who are making recreational marijuana sales, or is it all counties, and are they doing it, dividing it up by population? Do you know any more about that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I apologize for not including that in the portion where I went over where the proceeds go, because that was something that we really discussed a lot during the legislative session. It's our position, representing all the counties, that all of Nevada's jurisdictions and communities will be impacted by Question 2 and the legalization of marijuana. And so it was our hope that there could be money spent, spread out statewide to address community issues that we know will come up, as well as costs to law enforcement. So it's our understanding that that $5 million a year that's called out in SB 487 will be distributed statewide. However, at the end of the day, that will be carried out by regulations through the Department of Taxation. And so we are looking forward to working on the regulatory process with the department, and we are hoping that when that portion gets discussed on how that money will be distributed, that it will be interpreted that way in the regulations, and there will be some formula. We have some ideas for what that formula might look like in terms of how each jurisdiction might be able to be allotted some of that money. But at this point, that hasn't been implemented yet, and so we just don't know. But that is definitely our hope. And $5 million divided up statewide is, especially if you do it by population or even by, well, there's different ways to do it, but by population gives, it's very little. It's not a lot of money at all. So the dollars that from the local government perspective, so we were hoping there perhaps might be more, and of course our hope is that that is spread statewide. For those jurisdictions that do decide to allow the businesses, they have the authority under SB 487 to charge up to 3% on gross revenues, a fee for that business coming into their jurisdiction. But besides that, the majority of the revenue for this does go to the state.
Thank you.
I think I did a quick back of the napkin on the, if it's divided by population, I mean, we're in the ballpark of $100,000 would be Carson City share of that. So any other questions for the state? Anything from the audience? Questions about state regulations, sir?
You were talking about the Indian community being able to sell marijuana.
Could you come up to the microphone, sir, if you don't mind? Just so people.
You were talking about the Indian community being able to sell marijuana. Are they going to be tax exempt, where they don't have to pay any taxes because they're on a federal reservation or whatever?
It would be up to each tribal government to decide, similar to the way the state of Nevada did, whether they wanted to allow the use as well as the businesses, and then also up to them in terms of how they wanted to assess any additional dollars from those sales, at the register.
So they're going to be exempt from taxes to the state, though, right?
So I don't know. Does sales tax? I mean, it would be someone who knows more than I about how that stuff works. But statewide, does our sales tax get assessed in on tribal land?
Okay. Right now, in all tribal governments, there's a compact with the state of Nevada for tobacco, liquor, and sales tax that they must charge the same tax as if they were a normal state business, but they get to collect the tax and keep it themselves. So they still have to charge that same tax. They're not going to be price competitive because of that, but they get to collect the tax and keep it for their own revenue. And then as far as the tribal marijuana program goes, SB 375 established that they would have to enter a compact with the governor's office per tribal reservation and per tribal government. So it's not an automatic that they can open up and become a tribal marijuana operation. They have to get into talks individually for each tribe with the governor's office and enter a compact per tribal government. What?
That answer your question, sir?
Yeah, and I got a comment for the lady over here that they're talking about warning about the felony if you sell it to kids or other people for marijuana. You know, like on cigarettes, they got the warning for cancer. They could put that on the packaging that if you sell it, it's a felony, and that one might help too.
There is legislation that specifies that there's a number of warnings that are required to be put on each of the packages for a marijuana product, including, must be kept away from children. I don't know if the language about the felony also was included. I don't think so. They didn't get all the bugs worked out this session. If legislators listen, sometimes we hope, to the constituents, so it's always something that could come up in future sessions if folks are interested in adding to things like that in the state laws. This session was sort of fast and furious with all these laws regarding marijuana, and no doubt in 2 years when the legislature goes back into session, all of these will be revisited and further tweaked, I would assume.
And I'll just add real quick, Rebecca, that's a great suggestion. And just because it's not required by state law doesn't mean that it wouldn't be a good practice to have. So I'll certainly, work with RISE to figure out what that would look like, because, packaging goes through certain processes in the state. RISE currently is not growing any of the marijuana that it sells to patients, nor is it manufacturing or producing any of the products that it sells, so it's largely not responsible for the way that it gets packaged and winds up in its dispensary, but it is responsible for when it leaves the dispensary. So there might be some opportunities for us to include some labeling of that nature, but without having, being able to talk through it with the owners and managers. I can't say unequivocally that that can be done, but I'm pretty sure there's some room for some labeling of that, and so thank you for your suggestion.
Okay, one more.
Just to move on, and I apologize, Shelley Aldean for the record. So, I have no doubt that the people representing the marijuana industry at this table are well-intended. However, circumstances change, operators change. Operators change, and so my question is, I'm assuming that the license that is issued to the individual and not the establishment. For example, if RISE was to sell their business to another party, would that license automatically be transferred upon the applicant or the new owner going through some sort of investigative process? Or does that applicant have to start over, basically pay the $5,000 fee, I believe it's a $5,000 application fee, and whatever, depending on the category they fall into, whatever additional fees are required?
And
I'll just lead off, and Rebecca might have more detail than I, but it's my understanding that they do a very strict screening on all the folks that get involved, and then they, every year, every 5 years, then they redo that screening on all the owners. That's a great question. If the establishment is sold, does the license also have to, do the new applicants have to go through and reapply as themselves for the license?
So the license is transferable at the state level. It could be sold, but anybody who becomes a new owner does have to go through the same process and qualify to make sure there's no felonies, make sure that all of the same litmus, test is met between the new owners. That's different at the state level than at the local level. And Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, or Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but let's say in a scenario RISE sells their licenses here. Their ability to operate here is conditional on a special use permit. And so it's my understanding that if they were to sell their license, the new owners and operators would have to essentially go through the Planning Commission again to be able to get approval to operate under that special use permit, because that special use permit is conditional upon all of the factors of information that were presented at the time for that approval. And that would change if the owners changed, correct?
And those special use permits, as I recall, are periodically reviewed, right?
Yearly.
So, Lee Plemmel, Community Development Director. She's right that our special use permits for medical marijuana establishments are for the specific owner, and we generally followed the state law with that. That is actually unusual for special use permits. They usually stay with the land and are allowed to transfer for a use, but consistent with state law, roughly, we require a new special use permit for new ownership of medical marijuana establishments. So that's a great transition if, she's going to add something, almost, a couple more points.
Sorry, I apologize. I want to add one more thing that I think might also answer your question from the local government perspective, because local governments do have control over that as well as the states. It's not just that state license. And I'll share that in other jurisdictions across the state, specifically Clark County down in southern Nevada, not only have they required a special use permit, but also a privileged license. So bars, gaming establishments, things like that in communities generally require a privilege license where there's a higher threshold of screening for those applicants, and other jurisdictions have enacted a privilege business license process for these businesses, as well as just going through the application process for the land use pieces. So that's another option for local governments.
Okay, I have a short presentation to talk about. We're getting into a little discussion about zoning regulations, and we currently do allow medical marijuana establishments in Carson City under certain circumstances and with certain requirements. I didn't know previously, and I think most people know, we currently have a moratorium on recreational marijuana, on all types of recreational marijuana facilities in Carson City. So right now, they are prohibited. They're not allowed pending the adoption of whatever applicable regulations there would be for them. So that's, again, part of the purpose of this is to get some of the comments regarding that. So let me go over what's permitted and how we regulate medical marijuana establishments now for some context about how we might be thinking about recreational marijuana facilities. The medical marijuana establishments, they include the cultivation, production or product manufacturing. I think they switched to the term product manufacturing now, which describes the edibles and things like that. Testing labs, and then the dispensaries are the places that the public goes to buy the products. They are only allowed, and I'll have some graphics coming up, only allowed in certain areas of the city, and then we have touch on some of the, as we mentioned, there's special use permit, and I'll touch on some of the further restrictions that they are in in Carson City a little bit later in this. So I just got a few maps here just to show where they're permitted now in Carson City, medical marijuana establishments. So this map represents where cultivation, production, and testing facilities are allowed, and it's the darker blue shaded zoning areas. This is a little bit older map. There's a recent change in the upper left-hand corner. That general industrial area has expanded a little bit around the airport, so currently it's that general area, but it's a little larger now where these types of facilities would be located. And these are the approved facilities in Carson City. So right now, there's different types. So we have cultivation, production, and then there's three of them that are approved for a combination that are both the cultivation and production.
Hey, Lee, could you do me a favor?
Yeah.
Go back one and just orient everyone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So they understand what
Yeah, does everybody see? Okay. Yeah, so this is not the entire city. That's a good idea. That's presentation 101 with maps, is orient everybody. But this is the freeway and Highway 50 East. So this is Highway 50 East going out here, and this is the freeway. So and again, these zoning areas are general industrial. The area where they're located in Carson City is not only located by zoning district, but there's a further geographic limit that was put in there based on being east of the freeway, and I forget the exact specific words that do that, but it's limited to these areas and that shaded area there. So then going forward, these are all the ones that have come through and got state certificates to operate and special use permits from the city to operate. And then drilling down a little bit further, the circled and shaded ones there are the only ones that are actually in operation at the time. There's one, at this time, there's one cultivation facility on Arrowhead Drive. There's Lucinda's product manufacturing facility on Highway 50 East, and then there's a combination facility. I'm not sure that they're doing both yet, but there's a combination facility right at the Lyon County border at the east end of Highway 50 East. These types of facilities, and I'll talk about the regulations being business, but as you drive by them, especially these, you don't know that they're in the cultivation. You don't know they're growing marijuana inside. In fact, the cultivation facility was in an existing warehouse building, as was the production, and the only new building is the one out to the far east there. By the nature of the business, they don't want to draw attention to them anyway, so they're pretty nondescript. Moving on to dispensaries, I have two slides that show the permitted areas and zoning in Carson City for dispensaries. Again, this is that same map, Highway 50 east of the freeway. For dispensaries, it includes not only the general industrial zoning along the highway, but also the general commercial, and only east of the freeway. We only allow 2 dispensaries in Carson City by zoning regulation, and this is one of them. It's the red dot here. It's in the vicinity of the Arco on North Lampa Drive there. And then the other area in Carson City is on South Carson Street, generally south of Kuntz Lane. So this is South Carson Street with Spooner Highway 50 East heading up to the lake here, with Clearview, and Kuntz, and our second and only second permitted this medical marijuana dispensary in Carson City is located on Clearview Drive there. So kind of summarize, this just showed, now this puts a context. These are all of them, and I think these are all of them that have been approved in Carson City, and the only ones operating are the 2 dispensaries and the other ones, and I think this gets to Nick's point about the market demand. So there was people were applying to us, applying to the state like crazy when medical marijuana first became legal, but the market's not there yet for all of these places to be open and selling the products. I mean, we anticipate with recreational marijuana, if they're permitted to operate in Carson City for recreational marijuana, that they would, we've heard indication from these that they would go into operation. In fact, some of them are even, I think one of them's under construction now, that one of the cultivation and production facilities. So a little bit about that's kind of well, I'm going to cover a little bit more of the zoning next, but again, looking at business license fees, here's the current business license fees that we collect from these businesses now that were adopted a couple years ago when they started operation. So, and with the facilities that are in business in Carson City now, that's generated a little over $100,000 in business license fees is what we've collected at the beginning of 2017 for those that are operational. We don't have any testing facilities in Carson City. And then a little bit more, drilling down more into our zoning regulations. So in addition to location, there's some other regulations that we were permitted expressly by the state, and mainly those first few bullets generally follow the state regulations, but we've included them in our regulations. There's no consumption permitted on the premises. They can only be in permanent, professional-looking buildings. Again, that follows state law, but it's not Kwanzaa huts. It's not see-through greenhouses by the side of the road. We have them meet the same standards for new construction, meet the same design standards as any other warehouse or professional building. The signage is, again, limited by state law and by our code, so so it has to be similar signage to like pharmacies in both size and the nature and the presentation. They're not permitted to have marijuana logos or other things like that on it. No outside display, and in fact, no merchandise visible at all from the outside of the building, again, following state regulations. We further have limitations on the hours of operation that are limited to a maximum of 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., depending on the particular location of the establishment and through the special use permit that could, on a case-by-case basis, be limited further. Of course, drive-through service is prohibited. And we have further, in drilling down to that map, not only by the area and then zoning, we have other separation requirements from residential districts on residential streets, and that so there's limited areas to those. So that's really, and I'd be happy to answer any questions to drill into the details of those regulations further that we have on medical marijuana establishments. But I want to conclude before turning it back over to the panel here with just some thoughts on what we want to come away with and what we want to hear and be able to present to the board about it, about possible zoning issues to consider for recreational marijuana. Again, if the board chooses to allow it at all, we want to talk about the location of establishments, maybe limits on the number of establishments or separation between establishments. One of the things that has been brought up about dispensaries in particular is to require co-location with the medical marijuana establishments. And I have up there also a specific question that the mayor asked at the last meeting to somebody that was speaking is, how should the city pay for anticipated fiscal impacts? And I think that question was both in regards to if the city allows such establishments in Carson City, and also if we do not allow the establishments in here but still have to deal with recreational marijuana legal, how do we pay for the anticipated fiscal impacts? And I think at this point, I should probably, yeah, Nick, go ahead.
No, I just want to jump on the end of that.
Yep.
Were you done? Okay. So we're going to open it up, as Lee said, to either the panel members, the public, whoever wishes to make a comment or ask a question at that point. Let me brief everyone in the room as to what I've recommended to the Board of Supervisors in terms of how we're going to move forward. So right now, we currently have out for public comment a business impact statement, and I believe all the comments are due back on the 23rd, correct?
Yes.
They're due back on the 23rd, because what I've proposed to the board for retail or recreational marijuana, whatever you want to call it, separate out the cultivation and the production and create a new category for general distribution, separate that out from the retail dispensary. By necessity, if there's no retail dispensary licensed to operate in Carson City, 100% of that product is going to get exported out of the county. So there's a business impact statement out for comment. We've already received back a number of comments. So on the July 6th board meeting, what we plan to do is present all the comments that came out of this particular workshop, present those to the board, also present the business impact statement to the board, again, for cultivation, production, and distribution. We would create a separate license category for those 3 classes of marijuana establishments. Because it's an ordinance, we're going to have to bring it back for a second board meeting, so that would be July 20th. And if the board votes, if a majority of the board votes to approve that, then somewhere after July 20th, our current cultivation production facilities would be able to sell recreation, or would be able to produce and grow recreational marijuana. We would potentially have, there's at least one current liquor distributor who has announced his intent to get a marijuana distribution license. And if you're following anything that was going on today, the district court judge here handed down a decision that is going to restrict distribution to alcohol to those who possess a wholesale liquor license. So we're proposing to create that additional license category. So where does that leave the retail dispensary discussion? Well, it leaves it right here. There's a number of things that the counties, we're a combined city and a county, there's a number of things that counties can regulate, but there are far more things that we can't. What Lee had up on your last slide, Lee, if you go back to that, the zoning decisions are the main decisions that the county gets to make. For example, I thought you had a great comment, sir, on the health warning on any marijuana product. Unfortunately, the local government doesn't have the authority to require that. I think it's a great idea, and I think it was spot on with Rebecca indicating that on a voluntary basis, they may go ahead and do that anyway. But we don't have the authority, for example, to require that type of a packaging. So it's important that we understand what we can, and if we need to, we could refer back to Dagny's slides on what local governments can actually do. It's rather limited. Zoning is probably the key thing. Following that is going to be the business license fees. As Lee briefed a couple of slides ago, we currently have a flat fee for business licenses. From my point of view as a person who has to run the city and deal with any regulatory, any criminal type enforcement to support the sheriff and the district attorney and the courts in that endeavor, we need the revenue to do that. So it's important from the city perspective. That was one of the reasons the mayor asked that question. How are we going to pay for these impacts? So I think the business license fee is the other big area. In addition to zoning, business license fees are the only real discretionary authority, those two, that local governments really have. Correct me if I'm wrong, for those who, no.
And I,
Do you want me to
yeah, I just want to tie into that a little bit about and he's talking about the separating out the production and cultivation facilities, and I don't think was covered in detail is that early start. There's temporary regulations that only allow existing operating businesses to apply whose licenses are good through April of next year, I suppose, supposing after which time others can apply. But so that was the purpose of circling those that are actually operating in business there, because those 3 facilities are the only cultivation and production facilities that are eligible to apply to the state under the Early Start program, and that would the ordinance Nick was talking about would fall under.
Lee, Shelley Aldine for the record. Lee, along those lines, we were talking about the 15% surcharge on production. Where in the chain of production is that assessed? At the production facility, when it leaves the production facility, or upon receipt of the product for distribution?
So the question, Dagny, and you can answer, so the question on the 15% that's assessed from the production facility, is it assessed when it leaves that facility? I think my understanding is that it's assessed to the business that it's leaving. It's based on their gross sales.
So that is income to the city. So our existing production facilities will be.
No, there is a certain amount set aside.
So I think as Dagny's slide said, that we have the ability as the local jurisdiction to assess 3% on gross sales as a business license tax. That 15% does not come.
That goes to the DSAs.
That does not.
That's in the initiative, and it's actually written for the cultivation facilities. When it leaves its first cultivation facility, it's charged a 15% wholesale tax. That wholesale value is actually determined by the Department of Taxation. So somebody can't sell it to themselves for $1. They must pay a tax based on what the Department of Taxation declares the wholesale value of a pound of marijuana to be. So that goes directly to the Department of Tax. They keep a little for their own operation costs. They set aside $10 million per biennium, and then the rest of it goes to the distributive school account for the state of Nevada. So that's what the 15% cultivation wholesale does.
So none of it finds its way to local jurisdictions.
No, that was the 5%.
So
that was the 5%. Okay.
So there's 15% on wholesale.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
15% on wholesale, which
Right.
is collected from the wholesaler.
Right.
That goes to the state, the DSA,
Right.
except for that $5 million that gets distributed.
Which is
right,
de minimis
which is,
when you
right.
consider
That's
how
why we keep
it's
forgetting about it.
diluted. Yeah.
And then there's a 10% at retail, which also goes to the state. There's sales tax. The majority of that goes to the state. So really, except for a small portion of the sales tax, the only revenue that can be realized by local government is a 3% on the gross revenue, which
For all types of facilities.
on each type of business. So
Okay,
on cultivation, on production, on your marijuana store, your dispensary, the city can charge 3% on each of those, of their revenues, their gross revenues.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Do you charge a gross revenue fee on any other business in Carson City right now? I know some districts do that for liquor stores and other facilities, tobacco shops.
No, in Carson City, we don't.
Jim Hartman for the record. I had hoped that today we might start at sort of a 30,000 foot level. And when we get down to how are we going to go forward and what are we going to do here? And if you start at sort of the 30,000 foot level, you'd recognize that Nevada is, with this early start program, is 6 months ahead of every other state that's legalized marijuana. California, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and will be a year ahead of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we are on a real fast track here. That's to begin with. when we talk about our options, one of the things that wasn't discussed when we talked about state options or what's happened in communities is the neighboring county of Douglas County has zoned out marijuana establishments. All 5 licenses won't be issued in Douglas County. And then I think there's a huge misunderstanding about other states and how it works in other states. We say, gee, it's legal in Colorado. Why don't we follow the Colorado model in some respects? Well, the Colorado model is 73% of the jurisdictions in Colorado have opted out, meaning they don't have any commercial marijuana establishments. So that's 3 out of 4. It's legal in Denver. Legal and commercially available in Denver. 215, I think, stores there. In Oregon, 89 cities and counties have opted out of legalizing commercialized marijuana. And I think we need to separate out the notion of legalization, which was passed. That is a battle that's already been over, to the issue of commercialization. How much commercialization is there going to be in various communities? That needs to be addressed here. And I would only say our brethren in Massachusetts are going to take 1.5 years. They aren't going to have their first sale until July 1 of 2018. And a lot of their little local communities are putting this issue to the localities on whether they want commercial marijuana in their neighborhoods, in their towns, and in their counties. And even in some areas that passed their question 4 by 53 to 47 or something, when it comes to a vote of the localities in Norwood, in Westboro, 81% of the locals say, no, we do not want commercial marijuana in our town, in our neighborhood. So I asked this group, start at 30,000 feet and look around and ask, is this really something the community here is in favor of, that there's a consensus view that we want, yes, we want commercial marijuana in this community? That, I think, is a question, a beginning point before we get down to the details of zoning and how many and all the rest of it. Thank you.
Can I just tag on to that? Sure. I don't want to hijack the meeting, I apologize. But I have been doing some reading on this subject. I'm by no means an authority, and I certainly can't compete with Mr. Hartman. But, you know, I was reading some information about some of the counties in Colorado that have opted out, including Vail, Colorado. And the Vail's mayor said that, you know, foregoing tax revenue is never an easy decision for any community, and the town council made the topic a major part of discussion before deciding to outlaw pot shops. The driving force behind the ban, Chapin said, was the recognition that protection of Vail's brand as a worldwide ski vacation destination had to be paramount. Quote, the Vail brand is a very valuable brand, and a lot of that brand is families, the mayor said. We weighed the value of that potential tax revenue against the value of the brand. I'm not making an analogy here. Obviously, Carson City is not Vail, Colorado, but I think as part of our due diligence, we need to visit some of those communities, at least have a conversation with the communities in Colorado who have elected to opt out, to see what the fiscal impacts have actually been. I think we owe that to the people of Carson City who, as you know, voted against recreational marijuana. So if we put a work group together, and you know, I know that the city manager has been considering that to really dive into these issues and do some analysis before we make a decision, I would strongly recommend that we look to our neighbors not too far away in Colorado, those communities who have elected not to legalize recreational marijuana, and see what the, you know, the actual impacts have been to their general funds.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think, yeah, we're going to have, so just where we are in the agenda, I think the next thing I'm going to do is go around, you know, with the panel here and offer any comments, presentations, anything else you want to bring up to discuss. Will Adler has a slide with some information. I'm happy to defer to somebody else if anybody else wants to go first. Otherwise, maybe I'll turn it over at this time to Will. And then after that, anybody else on the panel has any other presentations or topics they'd like to bring up?
You all have this in front of you, hopefully. But this is a demonstration of educational material that will be required by the state of Nevada and voluntarily given out by all their dispensaries across Northern Nevada and the whole state. So I would just like to go over this. I made a mock-up of a FAQ flyer, frequently asked questions, and what is or is not legal. And then another mock-up that is actually required by law. So this is a requirement under statute today that we list and explain all of these issues in the middle flyer here. And on the back page, I did what would be the back of both of these flyers. So a simple pictograph that sort of indicates a quick explanation of what is or is not legal in Nevada. Right now we have an opportunity to educate those who are in Nevada and who are going to be purchasing in Nevada what is not legal, what you are or are not allowed to do, and then what you should be doing once you purchase it. So the middle one here that I'd like to indicate is this is required under law. Under recreational sales and medical, we will now have to be handing these out with every purchase of an edible and every sale in our current dispensaries. But this is under Senate Bill 344. They indicate that we have to educate our customers on every purchase on all of these topics. And we will have to provide them with a leaflet and a handout when they leave the store and have explained it to them before they leave the store. That is what Nevada is requiring right now. We are at a gold standard above that of every other state because nobody requires this, nobody has this, and our governor took the stance in his State of the State address and said he would mandate an edibles education bill and an edibles bill for Nevada. So if you just want to go through that quickly or not, give me some comments on this because this is a mock-up, but this is also required by law. So we must be able to tell them all products must be out of the hands of children. It cannot be near them. So I've indicated that with a woman putting pills on a shelf. It says, if you do endanger a child consumes it, you are liable. So as an adult, as a purchaser, you are the one who's responsible. Like I said, first offense is a Class E felony. If you do it multiple times, it's Class C. Even if it's your own child, you are responsible in Nevada. They indicate that, and our flyers must indicate that as well. We try and educate them on the proper use of an edible. If you eat it, go low, start slow, or whatever. So it says, and if we must put this on our flyers, you must wait 2 hours or 120 minutes before taking another edible to know the full effect. We have to educate the customer before they leave the store. So it is the burden of proof on us in education on the industry to give this to them and to give them the education beforehand. We mandated pregnancy talks. We must talk to you and say, if you are pregnant, you should not be taking this. You must consult your physician. That is in the law right now in Nevada. And then there's another component. We say in our law, you may not mix alcohol, prescription drugs, and marijuana. That is a no-go in Nevada as well. Our law now states that, and that we must educate you on that before you leave our stores. So we are not just the distributor of marijuana. We will not just be the ones in the community selling, but we'll be the ones who have the mandate and the burden of the law to educate those in the community about marijuana. Just want to indicate that because that is in law today under Senate Bill 344 that just passed. And then yet again, we go over DUIs and what is or is not a DUI. Any use of marijuana, getting behind the wheel is a DUI. Drive high and you get a DUI. That is something we must tell all our customers starting July 1st, actually. And then give me some feedback on these guys over here. This is just as simple as I could put it. What is not allowed? If you're age 21, you're allowed to buy recreational marijuana or possess and use it. If you buy it in Reno, you could drive it back to Carson, possess and use. If you're a child, I put a red X over that. Not allowed to have marijuana. I mean, going through the whole thing, I tried to make it simple yet effective because this is what we'll need to do is provide education to the consumer and the community at large. And I think RISE has done a great job doing that so far, and so has Sierra Wellness with their patient community. I think they'll continue doing a good job with either recreational or just continue with the medical. But the facts are, as Dagny said, it's legal to possess and use marijuana today as of January 1st this year. Who's going to educate the community?
where's Carson City going to get the dollars to do it, I think is a serious question, because this is going to be on our backs. If we're not there, it's on one of yours, I believe. So any comments, questions, or tell me what I did wrong here?
If I may, Shelley Aldine, for the record, it's not a matter of, it's not a matter. As the old saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. These are very good intentions. But look at the war against drugs. How many years have we been fighting that? With good intentions, with all sorts of pamphlets and education in our classrooms, and a true commitment, social commitment to reducing the dependency of our young people in particular on drugs. Look at alcohol consumption, for example. I mean, look at smoking cessation. How many millions of dollars have we spent, you know, distributing pamphlets like this, well-intended, you know, appealing to a person's, you know, better sense. Unfortunately, there are people out there who don't have good sense. If people were perfect, we wouldn't have laws. And my concern is this is just one more nail in the coffin, you know, and I hate to be a cynic, but I deal with people in the Capital City Circles Initiative program, and our program incidentally has zero tolerance with respect to the use of psychoactive drugs. And the only people who have ever failed to graduate from our Getting Ahead classes were people who were actively using because they simply were unable to stay the course and do the hard work necessary to excel in our program. And I have some other comments I'd like to make, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation. But I am pretty passionate about this, and I am not, you know, categorically condemning any of you folks. I think you are well-intended. I honestly do. But I just don't think this is going to work. And we are going to find ourselves in the same situation we are with you know, other forms of drugs, with alcohol and tobacco. It's going to be a categorical failure. And that's my opinion. So.
Thank you.
But thank you for your presentation.
Well, I just comment briefly that I 100% agree with your comments, and I do think that's why question 2 passed. There was a war on drugs for 70 years almost, and it did not work, and the pamphlets didn't work, and the criminalizing of it did not work. And that's what actually the majority of people voted for in Nevada, but that's why we're here talking about the retail aspect of it, because it is a legal reality now today.
Okay, I mean,
but I'm going to...
Let's keep it, we have to keep it moving forward.
Yeah.
We are not going to recriminalize marijuana. The voters already decided that.
Do you have a question?
So let's talk about what the county can do.
Do you have a question or comment, sir?
Quickly on this here, just because I see it being an expense, and I can also see it being thrown out in the parking lots, and we're not in the business of killing trees, but what I propose is if we were to find out a time that we're realizing each person is within the property, then we could start educating them as soon as they walk through the doors through televisions, things that are playing that could educate them from the moment they get there until the moment they leave. Without having to necessarily, these will be there and available, but not have every person have to have one because they're going to go into the garbage is how I see it.
I fully agree. Sadly, it indicates that we must, at least on your first purchase with that storefront, give them a go-away flyer with education. So under law, we must give them a flyer right now that indicates the middle piece here. The piece on the left is optional for education, but the whole time, and if you go into a dispensary, I'd say the experience currently today and will be in the future is education first. They do, if you're new, they talk to you. They want you to have a good experience because they want you to come back. So they will go through every step of the process, every product, and everything they can for you right now. But thank you. I agree.
Linda, did you have a comment on that?
I do. I'd like to, as Nick said too, kind of focus it back to the intent of today, which I believe is to look at maybe some things that we can affect locally here. And I love the 2 slides that Dagny has on page 3, where it really outlines, you know, what we can and can't do. So if I had a recommendation, there's 2 things on the table, first of all, and I want to recognize what Shelley is talking about and others, which is the opt-out. But if we proceed to move forward with our working groups, I would like to see one of the topics be to discuss exactly what we're doing today in a very organized, controlled fashion, which is advertising and marketing in Carson City. There is a really great recommendation over the Department of Taxation right now around advertising and marketing that we could use as a stepping stone to jump off of, don't have to start from scratch. Another I would like to see is training for the bud tenders. It's another recommendation that has been presented at the Department of Taxation. We already have a wonderful alcohol server training here in Carson City for all of those that sell or provide or give away alcohol. And this is something that is new to recreational marijuana. Dispensaries are very, very different from retail establishments. Dispensaries are for medicine, for the medical marijuana patients. When we get into recreational, we don't have that relationship with, as in medical. And our alcohol sellers, through an ordinance to the Sheriff's Department, are required to go through a training. It's something that was recommended also at the statewide level. We'll see what happens, but we don't have to follow the state. There are some things we can do locally here, which is require the bud tenders within 120 days to go through some sort of a training. Those are a couple things that I would like to see us focus on, is the marketing, advertising, and then the local training. And another thing to tag on to Will, I do believe that it has to start at the store, and I do know the law, and I know the little sheet of paper they have to slide in the bag and all of that. And then I believe that it behooves Carson City to carry on that education beyond the doors of the dispensary. Now, that is not something that is regulated by our city. There's not a regulation that's going to occur that say, but there are organizations around this table and people in the audience that's what they do for a living, is that they are social service agencies that provide education. We have our school superintendent that would probably welcome education relating to edibles in the school district. We can take care of that portion of it, because Carson City is a close community, and we can make sure education goes beyond the dispensary. So I think we can work together. But the two that we can do is advertising and marketing, and some sort of mandatory training for our new bud tenders that are coming into town.
Sabrina Ostrander. So I would like to add to that I had never done this before I worked at Rise, started working at Rise, going through breast cancer at an early age, and finding that was the only thing that worked the best for not just the physical, after 5 surgeries in 2 years, fixing and doing all the things I need to do to fight cancer. Working there is the only thing that actually changed my whole understanding of how to help with myself. But even just today, just seeing a new patient come in with her daughter who was very emotional and I could relate to and help ease her, and just helping her mother who's going through a lot of anger through her cancer. And just being able to express and personalize with her and tell her how I have gone through the process in the training, working at Rise, has made such a significant change in my own life. And now I could share that with her and help her know exactly how to make sure she was very against the THC, her mother, but I was able to offer and educate her on exactly what she can use that would give her at least bring down that anxiety, the anger, everything. And not just only that, but also as in a medical way of helping her body with all the chemical toxic that was going through with her liver and all of that I could at least help her. And so it wasn't just helping her mother through her cancer treatments, but also the daughter that's taking care of her. So I 100% agree with that, and that's been the biggest thing at Rise for me. The whole reason why I even work there. So.
Sir, did you have a comment on training?
Yeah, on training as well as advertising. Speaking as someone who has been both a bartender and bud tender for half a decade, as a bartender, at least in California, when I first started, didn't have to get any certification at all, but then I had to get what's called a LEED certification done through California's ABC. It's also done online as an e-tips certification. Their certification makes sure that your bartenders know how to tell fake ID, fake bills, how to know if someone is too intoxicated, how to know when to cut them off. It allows venues to have a lower insurance premium. So it's something that's done as a public-private partnership. And for myself, I've already proposed this to the California Insurance Commission as a way to make the industry more insurable, as well as create a training program. As a bud tender in the medical space, I think it should be a little more like a pharmacy tech style certification, maybe not quite that hardcore. Something you could look at is the interpreting program, which is done out of the Trichome Institute in Colorado. California also just created a cannabis-specific pharmacy tech program. That's another thing you could look at for the medical side of things. But there clearly should be different training requirements for medical and adult use because what people need to know is different. In terms of advertising, and also I want to touch on DUI laws, just a general plead for equity towards cannabis. We are in Nevada. Nevada is a very big gambling state. I really can't go anywhere without seeing ads for gambling, and I feel like the regulations on cannabis advertising should mirror those in many ways. Gambling addiction is much, much more common than cannabis addiction. If you actually look at the statistics, also in terms of how life devastating it is, the amount of money, the amount of pain caused by gambling addiction, huge. So I really feel like it would be unfair to be harder when criminalizing cannabis advertising compared to gambling advertising. Tied to that, if you look at DUI laws, statistically speaking, cell phone use, alcohol, way, way, way more impairing than cannabis. The best studies out there really show that cannabis, while it is impairing, it makes drivers maybe a little bit weavy, but they actually stay within their lanes. If you look at simulation studies, they might go a little bit slower, but they're not speeding, they're not driving recklessly like an alcoholic is, or sorry, like a drunk driver is, I should say. I don't mean to. Based off the simulation studies I've looked at, yes, cannabis is much, much safer than alcohol when you're behind the wheel. It's not perfect, but the law should reflect that these are not the same in terms of impairment. Alcohol is a much more impairing substance, as are cell phones.
Could I just add real quick? I mean, based off of the initial comment, that there was actually a bill that was supposed to be a pilot training program for workers in the state that the governor vetoed. And so I think that discussion will be ongoing regarding training. That is factual. It was a training. I worked with the lobbyist who worked on it. Yes, I did. And that comes out of a program that has been instituted in California. The throughput on that, I mean, so my firm has done business now in this industry in 10 different states, and we've helped shape regulations in a lot of those different states. Some states are leaning towards pharmacy tech-like training programs. I know that, just factually speaking, because I work with RISE on compliance issues here, that their level of training is quite intense, and the type of education that they can offer to anybody who walks into their doors, regardless of the reasons why they're using, is going to be standard. So somebody uses a marijuana product for medical purposes, they still need to understand the gradation of product offerings, regardless of whether they're walking in for a medical purpose or for curiosity purpose. They still need that type of education. And so, again, the local jurisdiction, from my understanding, can't require things like that, but certainly the level of training that we do internally is what is the high standard that we hold ourselves to.
Dagny?
Yeah, I was just going to, based on the last couple comments, sort of provide a sort of delineation on, from at least my knowledge, what things that the local government can control and regulate and what things that they cannot based on the current laws that were just passed. So I'll just go through the list of things that were mentioned. First, Linda's comment on training for employees and what Rebecca was also addressing. So that is one of the areas that the local government cannot enact regulation or an ordinance more strict than what the state is doing. However, the state is in the process or will be of developing their regulations, and so probably, to engage with the state on how, what the state is going to require there. That's the venue for that. But unfortunately, that's one of those areas that local governments were limited, was that employee training. In terms of education of the public, state law is silent as far as I know on education of the public, so this would be perhaps require a little bit more legal research, but I think that is something that the local government might be able to engage on and regulate on. So in terms of advertising, Also, local government is free to be more restrictive than what the state does. DUI laws, of course, that's the state. Those are state laws. That's probably a question for the DA, but I think, I don't know in terms of state and local, but I know the majority of those are in state law. So, so at the local government level, you know, the jurisdiction does have a lot of things that they can regulate and do. The licensing process is a big one. And the local government can pass a number of ordinances that can be more restrictive than state law. And the only things that they cannot be more restrictive than the state on are packaging, dosage, the seed to sale tracking system, product types available. So like, for example, the dabs and the types of marijuana that's sold, local government can't say, well, you can't sell those. That's one. Most of the transportation, but not all, local government cannot be more restrictive on, and then the licensing of employees. So it sounds like a lot in that list. However, those are the things that the state decided they were going to set the standards on so that they could be uniform throughout the state. However, there are a number of things, the local governments, that are left: location, advertising, licensing, how you're choosing your licensees, and the standards you're going to apply to those people. So there are a number of things that the local government does have control of, but of course things that in this forum you just won't. So.
Okay, Lucinda has something, and then maybe we could bring it back to Shelley. Says she has a presentation, so we'll move on to that next.
I would just like to say I like your idea of training, formal training for the bud tenders. I think we have 2 dispensaries here right now, and most likely if we had conversations with those dispensaries, I could see that they could collaborate together and develop a unified certificate that the bud tenders could take. I'd like to share with you at our production facility, while it's not required, I do require every single employee at a minimum to have a food handler certificate, and I ask them to prepare for that, to study the Carson City Department of Health Food Handling Manual, which they do. Additionally, my manager has a food handling manager certificate, and the extractor also has a certificate where I flew them to Denver to work directly with the manufacturer so that they really understand how to operate the machinery. I believe while we can't do this by regulation, I think that the industry here would step up and make those things happen on a volunteer basis, just because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to have the employees be safe, and it's the right thing to have quality products.
And Mr. Stokes has to leave soon, I know, so we're going to give him an opportunity here.
Thank you, Mr. Plemmel. I'd like to just add my voice again for looking into what it would take. I haven't heard much from city officials regarding the zoning aspect. It sort of seems like we're on this track of having I don't know, regulations put into place so that sale of marijuana can happen here for recreational purposes. I know that as I'm looking at some of this, you know, go slow or go low and take it slow. I don't know any teenagers who do that, and I'm certainly can probably bet that every one of you in here has had some health class in school someplace that said, you know, drugs are not healthy when used in certain ways. So we're talking about the education of our adults. We're going to continue with the education of our kids, but you know, they have parties where they want to feel the effects of something, and that then translates into all kinds of bad things happening. And so from a young person's perspective, from the perspective of my professional life, I just can't get behind a full-blown effort to try and make recreational marijuana more available to our kids. They're going to get it anyway, and if we make it more difficult because they have to drive to another county, I'm in favor of that. So I know that there's lots of middle ground here, but I'm probably on the one side that says I'd prefer to have it restricted in our county and in our city.
Thank you. Shelley? ready for your
listen, I'm not gonna
comments.
give up.
And
I've been going through my comments, and I understand what Nick is saying, that, the camel's nose worked its way under the tent with medical or medicinal marijuana. And I think that, the industry appealed to our better natures. Obviously, we do not want people who are suffering and in pain to do so unnecessarily. I understand that, and I am supportive of medical marijuana. But I do think, and Jason alluded to it earlier in our conversation, that, when we normalize something, it suddenly becomes okay. And social norms are important because they define a range of appropriate behaviors, not necessarily laws, but what I consider public opinion. I think public opinion matters. What parents think matters. What associates or colleagues think matter. And what society thinks and what Carson City thinks matters. And I look at Carson City, and I've been here for a while. I mean, we're a very innovative community. I mean, starting with our consolidation in 1969, why did we do it? Because it was in the best interest of our community. We've led the way in advocating for regional cooperation through mutual aid agreements and MOUs. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. And I really think, to honor the vote of the people, we need to zone out retail marijuana sales within Carson City because it's both appropriate and consistent with our history of doing the right thing, and it is consistent with our values as a community. And, I get a little bit upset when we talk about trying to make the best of a bad situation. You're not a leader unless you lead. And we are just following in the footsteps of other states in many respects who have legalized recreational marijuana. I think we can live with Washoe County and Clark County and Nye County. I think Nye has legalized it. I don't know if I'm correct on that. But the vast majority of the counties, especially in the rurals, have not, because they are legitimately concerned about the consequences and about the message that it sends, especially to our young people. The other thing I'm concerned about with respect to the people that we serve through the Circles Initiative, these people need employment. They need better employment. In Colorado, one of the biggest challenges is finding people for large companies who can pass the drug tests. So what are they doing? They're actually importing people from out of state to fill those jobs. So that leads to greater unemployment, and that leads to greater homelessness and, and greater human suffering. And I guess from an ideological standpoint, I just cannot sit here idly and let this happen. I mean, I just can't, and maybe as a result, I shouldn't be on the work group. I mean, I stand ready to be convinced otherwise, but based on everything I've read, I am just really concerned about how it's going to affect the people of this community, especially the young people. And I don't think just because you try to clean it up that it's necessarily a good thing. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And again, the purpose of this is to hear all the different point of views and the sides and bring these comments along. So, we're not making a decision today. We're not going to convince everybody of the other.
If you want to come up to make a comment, please feel free. Just grab a mic. Thank you, Richard. Feel free to come up, grab a microphone.
The point was just brought up about zoning cannabis establishments outside the city. I just wanted to speak from my own experience on that. I was working at a dispensary in San Jose, California, when the city moved to effectively do that 3 years ago. With what was meant to be a regulatory scheme, they made it so less than 1% of the parcel land in the city was actually able to be used for cannabis businesses. If you're not familiar with San Jose, it's a city of nearly 1 million people. It is a sprawl of a huge city. So for less than 1% of the parcel land to actually be useful for cannabis businesses, it seemed very intentional, like it was done that way. And I'm just curious, if anyone has thought about current zoning regulations with the residential buffer and all that, like what percentage of the city actually could be used for businesses now? Perhaps they've already been zoned out of the city based off existing regulations.
No, for medical marijuana, Lee Plemmel Community Development, for medical marijuana establishments, we're limited for dispensaries, first of all. So we have the 2 dispensaries that were initially permitted by the state anyway, so that's maxed out. But there's quite a bit of vacant property. There's no other limitations on zoning. It's limited by area. Carson City is much larger than our urban area, so I don't think, and we're small enough. I mean, it certainly wasn't zoned out of medical marijuana. Certainly wasn't zoned out, but it was just with consideration for the areas of the city that would have less impacts on residents.
Thank you.
Diana Ortiz. If I have one comment to share, I don't know how many are familiar with the Monitoring the Future survey. It's this, basically research through the University of Michigan and Arbonne under a grant from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA, and they have a lot of the leading research in regard to the effects of alcohol, drugs in the brain. I would invite everybody to go onto NIDA's website. Awesome publication, The Science of Addiction, the Brain, and it really talks a really good job about just the effects of every substance. And cannabis definitely is a mood-altering substance, an addictive substance, and it affects the brain just as the same as every other substance. So there's the research and the science behind that. So I wanted to share, this is from a parenting book and a training, and it's interesting that this was in this book, and they just updated this book in 2016. So basically, one of the alarming statistics, one is that overall there is a decrease in alcohol use. However, marijuana use is on a rise. And basically, 35% of high school seniors report using marijuana in the past year, and basically 1 in every 15 high school seniors is smoking marijuana on a nearly daily basis. That's the highest rate in the past 35 years. And so I see myself as a person that has a flexible mind. It can be open-minded about things, but I do also, as a parent, as a licensed alcohol drug abuse counselor, that definitely agree with the social view, the fact that it's, been legal, passed as far as the legalization. It does send that view that it's okay, and we need to really emphasize that it's not. All the evidence shows that when kids use, it increases risk for mental health issues. It actually, there's suggestions that long-term users, basically the parts of the human brain shrinks, negative effect on memory, lower IQ, so just a lot of issues. So definitely I express a concern in that regard also as a parent. Now let's say that it moves, this kind of process moves, and there are establishments to sell recreational marijuana. I would want it to be way out, not near any sort of residential area, even if they are zoned commercial residential. I look at the medical marijuana establishment, and if you look at it, it's really located in a lower socioeconomic area. Most of the residents in that Woodside area are Latinos, lower socioeconomic level, and I think historically there's always been, in regard to diversity, there's always been oppression, there's always been, I can't think of the word, just that, when it's not even, it's not, discrepancies. So a lot of discrepancies, so definitely to look at where these, establishments are going to be placed. When you look at just nationwide, most, liquor stores or anything like that are around lower socioeconomic levels where a lot of either Hispanic or African-American people live. And I just kind of thought about that with that medical marijuana establishment. You walk and you have a lot of apartments, you have, different areas of that sort. So that would be a suggestion that if that's something that the city moves forward, that it's away really from any residential areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Sheriff, did I cut you off at some point? Did you have any comments you'd like to make?
You could have, and I didn't have to make a comment. I enjoy listening to everybody, and I apologize wherever the gentleman went. I just want to put it out there that there's a double-edged sword that we're working with here in Carson, and part of it goes deep, Shelley, way back into our history. All of these people I've gotten a chance to get to know and work with, and as business persons, they have been a pleasure. It has been an absolute pleasure. And the nature of the cooperation amongst the businesses here in town has been phenomenal. Set that aside, a lot of these rules are made because these won't always be the businesses or the people that we're talking about. And so we can't always rely on this group that's going to be selling or providing those substances here in this town and having the conscientious base that they have right now today.
So one item I'd like to propose, we'll stay here and continue to do comment and take recommendations, but kind of based on one of Shelley's earlier comments about going to Colorado, that's not going to be feasible. We've gone to a number of communities in Colorado and Oregon, but it would be feasible to tour the existing facilities that are in your community right now. Because I'm not advocating for this industry, but I'll say the main decision you have, and I understand a lot of the arguments, they're aspirational in nature. They're aspirational goals. It's our values and who we are. We either at a local level regulate the marijuana that's going to be in our community, or you will delegate that authority to the Reno City Council, to the Washoe County Board of County Commissioners. That's unfortunately the situation you're faced with. So it's either going to be monitored and supervised by the city staff here, or you'll delegate that authority to the city of Reno.
Nick, if
That's
I might.
the reality.
No, but I'm not suggesting, I was suggesting, but I modified my previous statement about traveling to Colorado. We can do some outreach over the phone.
Sure.
We can talk to the folks in Vail. I mean, they made a conscious decision to opt out because they were more concerned about preserving a quality of life for the families living in their community. And I think we all have that same aspiration. And I'll call the mayor in Vail and I'll talk to him. Well, how is the impact? Because I think one of the towns that has opted in is a very short distance from Vail. So I'd like to know what sort of cross-traffic there is. I'd like to know how they have been financially impacted by the sale of marijuana in a fairly short distance away from their community. And because they are kind of the test tube. They're the test case. And I think we need to base a decision, on facts. In other words, has it a substantial increase? You're talking about, and I understand that's your job as a city manager to manage the finances of the community, but we are dealing with a lot of gray areas here. I mean, and I understand that a lot of the information that you've heard today is somewhat anecdotal. So let's do our due diligence and let's find out whether or not it has there are financial ramifications. I would prefer to pay more property tax, to be honest with you, and I don't like to pay taxes. I don't think anybody in this room likes to pay taxes, but that would be a healthier alternative than to legalize recreational marijuana.
I understand, I respect it completely, but what I would like to propose, and I have commitments from the industry representatives and from a business owner, that we can do tour. I think it'd be important to understand how the businesses currently operate and make an informed decision as to, do you want a locally supervised business operating in your community, because we're not going to recriminalize it, and many of the dispensaries deliver anyway. So do you want that situation, or do you want something where our sheriff, our fire inspector, our code enforcement, our HHNS director is able to monitor and supervise what they're doing? I mean, that's the question in front of us, really. That's the big question. Respectfully, the other things are aspirational goals.
Well, but there's nothing wrong with aspiration. I mean, and I know that you're dealing with the pragmatic, but I don't think it's impractical to expect more from our community, especially given how the people of this community voted. If I were sitting in that chair today, I would vote with the people of Carson City, because I think I owe them that as a fiduciary on their behalf. And that's just me. That's my personal opinion. But I am not trying to insinuate that these folks are bad people or bad business people. But as the sheriff just pointed out, they're not always necessarily going to be the operators of these facilities. And I just think that sometimes you have to draw that proverbial line in the sand and say enough is enough, I mean, somebody told me the other day, he said, well, what's going to be next? There are chat rooms, pedophiles have chat rooms and they have websites, and, is that going to become the norm? When does it stop? That's my point. When does it stop? And when do we say that the health and welfare of our children is more important than the fiscal impact of an industry?
May I? Sorry. Excuse me. May I? I'll turn it over to you shortly, Sabrina. To Nick's point, I think one of the discussion considerations should also be the availability for local parents to actually walk into a store and have a reasonable conversation with educated people about the products that are inevitably going to be purchased and consumed by anybody in the community. If you don't have a place for your parents or for your colleagues or for your kids, who probably some of you have college-age kids, right, who may even attend school around here, for them to walk into and get information directly from somebody who's knowledgeable, they're going to be resorting to things their friends say, which probably isn't well-founded or educated, things that they may find on the internet, which also may not be well-sourced, and hearsay, just extrapolated out, and or from a delivery service who's going to come to their door, deliver their marijuana, and leave. There's a big difference between having a brick and mortar store in the community where you can walk in and have questions answered for you. And I think that's one of the biggest resources that that RISE can possibly offer, in addition to, of course, being an example of how a well-run operation is. Of course, we'd love to open the doors to anybody, not just here on the panel, but anybody in the public as well, so that you can see the level of regulations that we have to hop through in order to provide the service and the products that we do. And that certainly isn't going away. Again, I've mentioned I've done work with a myriad businesses around the nation, and the level of seriousness that Nevada takes to this industry is above and beyond pretty much any other state out there at this point. And I think, having now worked with many operators around this nation, that those that are operating here in Carson City are exceptional. And I know that you'll hear the same feedback from other folks from the city who have seen other operations around the state. And so again, it really is, if it's not local operators here, it's going to be operators who are providing products to your community members anyway.
If I just may throw in a comment, I think that one of the things that Shelley is leading to, getting back to community norms and expectations, that one of the things that we need to remember is when it comes to our young people, how much they use of a substance are based primarily on two things, and one is availability, and the other is perception of harm. So when you begin to commercialize and legalize something, it puts you on that trajectory of minimizing harm, and that I don't think is a message we're looking at with our children, but we do need to be cognizant of that.
If you have a comment, if you could keep it relatively short, please. I'm going to open it up to the public.
Very, very quick. A point was made about the Monitoring the Future survey, and I believe it was misquoted. It was said that the highest rates of high school use in 35 years, but that's not accurate. What it actually found, the 2016 Monitoring the Future survey found highest rates of college use in 35 years. And to quote drugabuse.gov, not a friend of the cannabis industry, quote, marijuana use declined among 8th and 10th graders and remains unchanged among 12th graders compared to 5 years ago, despite the changing state marijuana laws. So actually, high school rates are the lowest they've been in 5 years, despite changing laws, and that 35-year highest rate was among high school or college kids, adults, who I believe would have the right to use this under the age limit of 21 plus. Thank you.
Is there anybody else in the public that has any questions of anybody up here, or like to make any comments on the record?
Yeah, I wanted to ask the DA, is there a number for like DUI on the marijuana? How much is in your system that makes you have a DUI from a blood test or a urine test? And because I know marijuana stays in your system for like up to 30 days, whereas alcohol, other harder drugs are out of your system in 72 hours. But because it's oil-based, it stays in your system up to 30 days. So how do they determine when you're impaired on a marijuana? Is there a test or what?
There is a number. It's a specific number. It used to, until very recently, this legislative session, You could do the test either by blood or by urine. They eliminated the urine test with some legislation this year for exactly the concern that you were talking about. Their science indicates that it lingers longer in urine and isn't necessarily compatible with showing impairment. So there's only a blood test now. And I don't have the numbers at hand, but they are specific numbers that if your blood is above that number, and that can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, you are guilty of a DUI. You can still be guilty of a DUI even if you don't have those magic numbers if the evidence demonstrates to the judge that you are impaired through your driving or through field sobriety tests or whatever it may be.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Farmer.
Guy Farmer, I'm a 50-year resident of Carson City. I went off into the Foreign Service for about 30 years, and I came back to Carson because I found a home here, and I love the quality of life, people who live here. Shelley Aldine has put her finger on it. It's quality of life, and it's the kind of community we want here. 13 of 17 counties voted against question 2, including Carson City. I hear from some city officials, well, it's a fait accompli. Let's just make the best of it. Okay, let's make the best of it. We have 2 medical pot shops in town. They have their standards, and it's legal. Nevada voted for question 2, although we didn't. Most the counties did not. I say, okay, recreational marijuana is legal. How much is enough? If you're going to sell it through the 2 existing pot shops. We don't need more. It's bad for the community. You'd heard from Shelley, who's highly respected in the community, and the district attorney, and the school superintendent, and the sheriff, that they don't want it. It's bad for our community. Let's limit it right where it is. You say the train's too far down the tracks, stop it right where it is. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, thank you. Any other panel member comments before we close? And I guess any other panel member comments?
So I just briefly want to comment on some of the things today, and Shelley, I do actually appreciate a lot of your comments. Nevada's legislature in 2013, when we voted on medical marijuana, did a 3-day stint with the Colorado legislatures, and we met with all of them. We met with the organizers to say what went wrong, what could we avoid. Again, in 2015, we met with Colorado officials and Washington officials to state, where did you fall into some pits? Where can we avoid stepping into those same things for our regulations? And then in 2016, we took another trip to Oregon to say, what happened between your medical marijuana program and your recreational marijuana program, so we can look into that. And I think Nevada's law indicates how often we did go to other states, because if you go to Michigan, their medical marijuana law, if you print it out, is 8 pages long. If you go to California, theirs is 30 pages. Nevada, if you print it out, it's 125 pages long. We put as much detail into law as we could. If you add our regulations, our NAC, our NACS code for it, it's like 300 pages long. I mean, we do detail in Nevada because we tried to not fall in those same holes. Denver area has about 350 marijuana businesses in the greater Denver area. The entire state of Nevada doesn't have 350 marijuana businesses. We limited it. We took a forward stance to say we don't want to be like that. So I do feel like we did try and address that in a lot of ways, but not just at a local level. So we have done the trips, we have done the time, and I think it shows because we were there at every step of the way. We have the highest rated lab testing scores in the nation. We have the highest rated security scores. Our dispensaries are basically camera hubs. There was a hit and run caught in the parking lot of Rise because our cameras face that way. There was 2 attempted murders caught outside the Mint dispensary because we are camera hubs that improve that area of the community. We try and do a lot with our partnerships. And then I myself live in Carson City. I have a little girl, and we're going to raise her here together. And I feel like The 2 dispensaries that we have are very low profile. I have people ask me every day, do we have medical marijuana dispensaries? Because you can drive right by them and not see them. So I feel like we have taken a pretty good approach to this, but I understand your concerns, and it does feel new and dangerous, but I feel like Carson City and Nevada has done it the right way with the amount of regulations we've done. I think we've done more than every other state. I can guarantee that. Thank you.
Thank you, Will, and I'm not discounting that. I guess what I'm saying is, we have medical marijuana establishments. Obviously, those establishments, are meeting a critical need, and I don't think anybody in this room would deny that. However, I guess with me, it's more of a moral question, and I really, I just don't want to go down that road, because I know that situations change, that people leave, that, businesses sell, people get lax over time with enforcement. No offense intended, Sheriff, but it's all about enforcement. And I guess what I was suggesting, Will, was that in terms of pursuing a little more, doing a little more due diligence, I was trying to address Nick's contention that even if we don't legalize recreational pot sales in Carson City, that we're still going to experience some fallout from Washoe County. And that's what I want to investigate. I want to see, based on my conversations with the mayor in Vail and some of the other communities that have adjacencies to communities where recreational pot is sold, what, the impact has been financially to their close proximity. That's what I want to focus on, and that's what I intend to do. So I appreciate your input.
Thank you. And just on Nick's note, I would also like to invite anybody in this room, not just on the panel, if they wish. We have 2 dispensaries, 2 cultivations, and a production facility that you're welcome to come tour anytime. If you like to schedule it, see the level of regulation I'm talking about. It is very minute. It is the smallest detail. But thank you for your comments as well. And there has been some fallout in some places, and other places there hasn't been as big a fallout. So it would be good to investigate that. But Nevada as a whole has done a lot of that. And another quick comment, we do have delivery services. We do have Blackbird Logistics, and they've delivered to 15 of the 17 counties in Nevada to date. I mean, they've had a call from rural Nevada all over the board for medical marijuana deliveries today. So 15 of the 17 have already been delivered to. Recreationally, I believe, will be the same thing. There will be deliveries. To Nick's point, will Carson City regulate its own marijuana sales? Or do you leave it up to Reno and Washoe? And that is something to think about. Thank you, though.
I'll just add too, in the event that there is no opportunity for sales to happen in a physical location in Carson City, I do anticipate that some of those businesses that are operating in Washoe County or Reno Sparks will use that to their advantage, because they'll know that the constituency here doesn't have an option to go in and purchase, and so they'll probably be more incentivized to be advertising to Carson City members, or excuse me, Carson City residents, and turning it into an opportunity essentially to target a community that otherwise can't walk into a store, because their only option will be delivery.
Jim Hartman, just to make a final comment. Jim Hartman, to make a final comment, I would encourage you to make contact with people in Colorado. In this last election cycle, we had a visit to this town from the district attorney of Denver, pointing out crime problems that are related to marijuana legalization in the city of Denver and in the county of Denver. We've had the governor of Colorado say, why don't you folks wait 2 or 3 years? We're still going through this experiment of legalizing recreational marijuana, Governor Hickenlooper. We've had former Governor Owens cut an ad with the former mayor, Wellington Webb of Denver, cut an ad saying, don't make the mistake we made by legalizing recreational marijuana. We have 2 former attorney generals of the state who, one, the current attorney general saying, today we have as much of a black market in marijuana as we had before we legalized recreational marijuana, and we also have her predecessor, who's now the mayor of Colorado Springs, saying, and cut ads saying we've got real problems in Colorado. So I would encourage, it's been the laboratory, it's 4 years ahead of us in many respects, and would encourage contacting city managers in these communities that have, remember, with 3/4 of the communities, cities, municipalities, don't have commercialized marijuana. They have to, I guess, go to Denver and other places to buy commercial marijuana. But I would encourage making contact with Coloradans and looking at Wellington Webb statements and Governor Owen's statements on their misgivings about the fact that Colorado legalized marijuana in 2012.
Again, we can, we'll be happy to continue making comments, asking questions. I want to put out a couple of key dates, so if you want to make a couple of notes that may be important for you. So the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors are going to be, mainly the Board of Supervisors, are going to be the people who determine what we're going to do as a community. And I certainly encourage everyone here and contact your friends and families who are as passionate as you are. Lobby the board members. Let them know what you think. Make your arguments to them. They're going to be the ones who actually determine this. So July 6th is going to be the next Board of Supervisors meeting right here in this room. It'll probably be in the afternoon, but I'll know more, kind of as we get the agenda together. But probably in the afternoon, we'll present not only the comments, so if you have your comment sheets, please fill them out. Also indicate on your comment sheet if you would be interested in doing a tour of the existing medical facilities that we have. We'll put that together. I think it would be important for everyone to do that. I think it would be important to see the level of regulatory oversight that these businesses operate with. And I think it would also be important to see the training of their staff and a lot of the things that have come up here tonight. So we'll put that together. Again, July 6th, Board of Supervisors meeting. I'm going to present all the comments from tonight. We're also going to present to them for their consideration the first reading of an ordinance that would create new license categories for grow, production, and distribution facilities. That'll have to go back to a second meeting on July 20th. If they approve it at the first reading on July 6th, that would have to go back for a second reading. I think it would also be important on July 6th for the Board of Supervisors to give guidance to the Planning Commission. So what I would like to do between now and when does the Planning Commission meet, Lee?
I think it's July 26th. It's the
Okay.
last Wednesday.
Planning Commission meets July 26th, and that's important for the following reason. We currently have a moratorium on all recreational facilities. That was extended by a resolution of the board to September 19th. Then it expires. And under the existing moratorium, the board can't extend it again. So the Planning Commission on July 26th would have to implement the process for a new moratorium. And I'm sure there's many in this room that would want to see that be a permanent moratorium on retail sales of marijuana. But that would happen on July 26th. So between now and July 26th, what I would propose to the folks here would be, for those interested, we'll do a tour of all the existing facilities, and we will meet again probably somewhere that third week in July, and we'll discuss some of the items up on the screen, what we can actually regulate and what we would recommend to the Board of Supervisors and also the Planning Commission. So that'll happen between now and July 26th. July 26th, the Planning Commission meets. They will take whatever action they're going to take with the existing moratorium. They would also look potentially at any changes to Title 18, which is our zoning code, okay? That's July. Then we go into August. That'll be the next time that the board would meet. Lee, if you could pull your calendar up, I forget off the top of my head the first meeting. Is it August 3rd? Thanks, Susan. So the Board of Supervisors would meet August 3rd. That would probably be an important date if the board looks like they're going to move forward with zoning in retail, marijuana. August 3rd would probably be an important date. So if you're planning your vacation calendar, if you don't already have plans, you probably want to block that out if this is an issue that's important to you. The train is as far down the road as it is, but you can stop the train where it is. So lobby the board members, let them know what you think. Please tell me, please tell city staff, I want to know. That would be important. I think there's probably some additional information that as we get it, for example, there was a question about that $5 million revenue, how the state's going to split that up. That's not critically important to us, but those type of issues over the next month or so, as we get, additional granularity on what the regulatory regime is going to be, we'll put that out as well. So does that sound like a reasonable way forward?
And with the comment sheets, so the comment sheets have they have an address if you want to mail it to us, but it has an email address if you want to scan it. So you can either write your comments, if you've written them already or want to write them before you leave, you can hand them to me. You can scan them and email to that, or just take that and you have an email address of the planning department and you can just send an email to the planning department. I would suggest if you're interested in a tour and you're going to send us your contact information, you can do that on a separate email if you don't want to write it down on the comment sheet.
Yeah, however you want to do it.
But there's an email on there to contact planning department and we'll coordinate any tours of the facilities. Yeah, so with that and the comment sheets, yeah, we appreciate your comments. Thank you for everybody's time, including those that showed up and made comments, and for spending 2.5 hours with us here, making it through this, and appreciate everybody. Will be forwarding comments. This will be available online, so it was good to get these comments. We'll encourage both the Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission to watch this. And so thank you, and if there's nothing else, we'll have a good evening. Thanks.